Welcome to New Atlas Live. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me today is my host and colleague, Angelo Giuliano, and also now regular guest, Rasheed from Red Pill Diaries. I will put all of their information in the video description below so you can find and follow their work and also support their work, please. And today, I think there's so much to talk about right now. There's so many things rushing ahead. We still have this supposed peace deal, the U.S. pretending to be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine when this is literally a U.S. war on Russia through Ukraine. We can get into that. The U.S. war on Yemen, an extension of a proxy war and sanctions, and the desire to go to eventual war with Iran. Continuity of agenda, by the way, under this second Trump administration. And of course, the tariffs, these global spanning tariffs that have not really spared anybody, sweeping tariffs all around the globe. And I just want to let's just show a couple of things here real quick. CNN, he presented this as these countries are putting tariffs on us, so we're going to put the same amount of tariffs, or the amount of tariffs will be related to the number of tariffs they have on us. But as it turns out, they're determining all of this by trade deficit, which is not any country's fault. It's not any other country's fault that the U.S. doesn't produce anything, shipped all of their manufacturing overseas, and now all of their companies are being out-competed by nations like China. There's also this. Ted Cruz warns Trump tariffs could be terrible for America. And he's also talking about a bloodbath at the next elections take place in the U.S., which I think we all agree that elections are meaningless. It's about public perception. But the beating the Republicans will take if the cost of living continues to spiral out of control and a recession seems imminent, I think that is a real fear. It'll create doubt in the minds of people who are even supporting Trump. And then, of course, there's why Trump may get away with his tariff trauma. And it's talking about pretty much all of the extremely negative and no positive outcomes for these tariffs. And what I wanted to do is kind of present my take on all of this to Angelo and Rasheed and get their reactions to this, because I hear the arguments people are making. I hear a lot of people say, it's irrational. It doesn't make any sense. Why did he do this? Why is he targeting everybody? Why did he formulate it this way? Here's a few things that I want to point out. Number one, is this really about reducing trade deficit? Is this really about reindustrializing the United States? Because if it was, there are other key fundamentals that would already need to be being addressed, such as reforming education. President Trump just eliminated the Department of Education. He's dismantling it, essentially. So that's not happening. State investment in infrastructure. The U.S. has very poor infrastructure, it's crumbling, and there is no serious plan about expanding infrastructure. Look at China's infrastructure, look at America's infrastructure, you'll know what I'm talking about. And so if you have no infrastructure, you have a poor education system, you don't have the human resources, you don't have the infrastructure, the natural resources, the supply chains to industrialize. How are tariffs going to do this? How's the free market just going to automatically do this itself? Now, this is my theory, because we have been talking about the U.S. obviously openly preparing for war with China, putting pressure on China in the Asia Pacific, putting tariffs, sanctions, targeting, undermining Chinese industry, China in general. And we see President Trump seizing the Panama Canal, talking about annexing Greenland to have choke points, control choke points to stop Chinese maritime shipping. I talked about the Biden administration setting this up for Trump, reconfiguring the Marine Corps to carry out anti-shipping maritime denial operations, essentially. When you put all of this together, and people told me, Brian, if America does that, because that's what that all adds up to, the worldwide interdiction of Chinese maritime shipping, that will implode the entire global economy. So when you put sanctions against everyone across the global economy, you are walling your economy off to an implosion you are planning to carry out against the global economy. You're going to destroy it. You have walled yourself off from it. not ideally, but on your own terms and ahead of time before you do this. And the analogy I want to make, and then I'll hand it over to Angelo and then Rasheed. So you have a ship, they have a ship. You tell your crew, close all the watertight compartments. We're going to ram our ship into theirs. You're going to seriously damage your own ship. They don't even think you would do this because it's so insane. When you ram into them, they're unprepared. Their ship will sink. You will be critically damaged, severely damaged, but you will still be afloat and they will be headed to the bottom of the ocean. This is where I think the United States is in terms of maintaining a global hegemony. And one more thing I want to point out is, let me share the screen here. Project 2025, again, I'm going back to this. This is the Heritage Foundation. This is the deep state, unelected corporate interests. They laid out Trump's foreign and domestic policies. Everything is here. Everything from handing the Ukraine conflict off to Europe as part of a division of labor, to preparing for war with China, streamlining USAID, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, streamlining of that all under the State Department. That is all in here. And if you go down to chapter 26, trade, and if you look at it, that's all they talk about is tariffs and as a means of basically decoupling from the rest of the world and preparing for confrontation with China to maintain American supremacy over the globe. So let's start with Angelo. What do you think about that? Could this be the U.S. walling itself off from the rest of the world before it starts imploding? It already is such a disruptive force for the emerging multipolar world. What if this is a drastic measure they feel that a last resort that they are resorting to?
Yes, absolutely. You just mentioned before a possible confrontation against Iran. There are simulations being done right now regarding the impact on inflation, those tariffs, the impact they have on the consumers in the US. It's roughly between 1% and 2%, and this is actually it's a lot. There's already an existing inflation in the US. Now you have they're sending back cheap labor. It's going to be more expensive to have local labor. Now, imagine if there was a confrontation against Iran, that means the impact would be 2-3 times the impact of the tariffs, because here we're talking about energy, and so we could, it's possible for the U.S. to have 5-6% combine, those tariffs and confrontation against Iran. So that's extremely suicidal. Now, the U.S. is using the excuse saying that the U.S. has a very low entry barrier when it comes to selling to the U.S. And actually, there are studies that says clearly that those figures are from the World Trade Organization. The average tariffs in the U.S. is 2.3%. Now, when you look at the EU, it's 2.7%, and China 3%. So U.S. is pretty much on the average. Now, when you see what Trump is saying, he's hammering like huge tariffs, and under the excuses, he come up with figures under the excuses of currency manipulation, and it's just invention. So I see he is going across the board to absolutely everybody. He's got a formula, and basically that's a project of trying to industrialize, trying to do many things. The idea, the concept itself is not wrong. It's and actually the US. It's very important for people to understand that when you look at each country, their percentage of selling of export to the US is 5-6 times in terms of importance of what the US does in their proportion of export to those countries. Sometimes it's even up to 10 times. So the US, as a coercive weapon, is in a much better position, and probably the only country that actually can hammer back equally is China, but the rest they can't. EU could eventually, but the US is playing the divide weapon. So they're trying to go against, to negotiate on individually on all those countries. Now the rationale itself, I do think that they might be able to grab hundreds of billions here and there, but mainly on the allies. But this is a cheap, it's a short term, it's a cheap move, but you do it only once. And what the countries are going to do, this is going to actually accelerate multipolar world, because those countries, they will need to hedge. The US was their largest partner. Now they need to hedge. It's not reliable anymore, and we need to have other markets. So isolation, this is going to be a process of isolation.
Okay, and Rasheed, what do you think about not just the tariffs in general, but this idea of walling yourself off from the rest of the world to then try to just disrupt and destroy everything, and in the hopes that you're the last one standing? Does that make sense, or is there something else at work here?
That's exactly my thoughts on it. You know, I was talking to my son earlier before the show, and he gave me a quote in describing the thinking of Donald Trump and his administration, and it's directly from Sun Tzu. And the quote is this: "An evil man will burn down his own nation to the ground to rule over the ashes." And that's what we're seeing. I thought that was a real apt quote about what's going on, because the walling off of America, you have to understand, we go back to time. The United States understands that there's no mathematical possibility for the U.S. to pay off its debts. It knows that that with every day that passes, they're falling behind China in multiple areas. They see the reemergence of Russia. They see a rising tide of nations like Iran and other medium to small nations bucking up against the United States. Because remember, 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have never seen a nation Iran size just openly go against the United States because of the fear of retaliation. And now they see that there's a domino effect going on. So with that said, the reason I put that that quote there is because when we look at the moves and the policies of Trump, they're throwing things now up against the wall because time is not on their side. Economics is not on their side. So they're saying, hell, everything is going to collapse. Well, we're certain that our economy is going to implode because of the debt situation. So it's all or nothing right now. Let's just do it. Let's just hedge up. This is the best option out of all of the bad options. So let's use this, and hopefully we can throw this up against the wall, and this will stick just a little bit longer to give the empire time to rest, recalibrate, and rearm, and try to come through the ashes and be the last one standing so that they can dominate again and try to fashion a new order after America's liking again.
Yes, and I wanted to ask Angelo, what you said this is a one-off attempt. You can do this one time. You're not going to get away with this again, and they can make all of this extra money, which is compelling. That is a compelling explanation. I just wanted to put this out here for consideration. Look at what the U.S. did locally to Taiwan and chip manufacturing. They created this crisis between Taiwan and the rest of China. They're creating what is almost certainly an inevitable conflict that threatens the existence of chip manufacturing facilities there. They have entire papers where they're talking about a scorched earth strategy of just destroying everything so China cannot get access to it. So that is how they're going to save Taiwan, is by completely destroying everything on Taiwan. They coerced TSMC to move its facilities over to Arizona. And when they tried to do this, they realized that the supply chain, the infrastructure, the human resources necessary to run these facilities efficiently do not exist. They had to bring half of the workforce from Taiwan is from Taiwan. They had to bring them over and permanently base them in the United States. And so they're trying to get adjusted to that because there are no Americans that can do these jobs. And so that's one example. The other example is from before 2014. I've talked about this many times. In Europe, things were going very well. They were cooperating with Russia. They were getting cheap energy from Russia. German industry was humming along. They were connecting together with China. There was this back and forth going on. And then the U.S., again, created a geopolitical conflict right in the middle of Europe, in Ukraine, overthrowing the Ukrainian government, putting a client regime into power, and then militarizing Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia, creating a situation where eventually sanctions were imposed on Russia. That was cutting off Russian energy. And then the US just literally blew up the Nord Stream pipelines to cut them off completely. And so then the cost of energy skyrocketed across Europe, and industry there was no longer viable. So then we had German companies transplanting their operations from Europe, again, to the United States. And so I think the United States said, what if we could do this on a larger scale? How could we do that on a larger scale? And I think they looked at tariffs and war together as two options to achieve this on a much larger scale. And again, it's just like Rasheed is saying, they're at a time China is surpassing all of the West. What can we do? What can we do basically to just flip over the game board and void this game and come out on top in their minds? Of course, I don't think it'll work, but I think that is their idea. Angelo, that and anything else you want to add to this particular topic of tariffs?
Yes, absolutely. I would say that there's no planification. When you look at if it was China in the position of the US, they would do planification of what is missing, especially in terms of infrastructure, the whole supply chain. And because it's capitalistic and extremely, very, very much market oriented, they think that everything will follow. So you throw in something like this, and you say like we want to reindustrialize, and everything will follow. It's not like this. You need to do planification. That means in terms of science, math, technology, all those people that come from those fields, study fields. You do not build up those industries that disappeared the last 20 years overnight. That takes decades. So that's a very desperate attempt. But ultimately, you see, they're panicking. Imagine, this is either if there's war or not. Imagine if there's no war, but there's de-dollarization. That would mean that the US would not be able to afford the standard of living they had. And one of the best ways to reindustrialize, you need to bring it back because you cannot afford to have that standard of living. And they're just panicking, and they're going across the board. So you see, why, when you look at they've been sanctioning all of them, and it's basically related to the tariffs level they have, and also the trade deficit they have against those countries. And there's no actually they didn't do any segregation. This is a special ally or so on. They're going across the board because they have no choice, and but it's a panic, and there's no plan for that. So I see the two things. One is actually war. One is even just the decline. You want to get ready for the decline because it's a financialized economy. I don't know if you guys saw the interview of Tucker Carlson of Scott Bassett. And actually, he's saying himself, he acknowledged that the US is an empty economy. It has become a financialized economy. It needs to be able just to go back to produce tangible goods. And the problem is that because the leadership of the US, they all come from, they are lawyers, the financial industry, they do not produce anything. And those are the leadership. And because of the structure of the economy, you have much more incentive in the US to go into Wall Street than to become an engineer. As opposed to China, the levels of salaries for engineers are often higher than people in banks. And those are the structural problem you have in the US, because people, they'd rather be paid higher wages and produce nothing than doing very hard work as an engineer and struggling.
Yeah, yes. In the United States, it is an entire paradigm that has taken hold and infected society. And this wasn't as if the American people chose to do this. One moment, Rasheed, I just want to show this because somebody in the comment section was talking about how the factory in Arizona was the most advanced factory TSMC has, and it only took 2 years and everything is working perfect. And this is just the beginning of this year. The US plant is unlikely to get latest chip tech before Taiwan. And all throughout this article, they're talking about all the problems they're having in the United States trying to set this up. and the fact that they had to bring hundreds and hundreds of workers from Taiwan to run it because Americans could not do the job. So I just wanted to point that out. And it's easy for people to sit there and cheerlead, from a perspective of fantasy, but in reality, this is what's actually going on. This is the CEO saying this. So it's not me saying it. It's not some anti-American. This is Reuters publishing this. So this is the reality. It will take the United States to reindustrialize. It will take them, because he said it doesn't take decades. Trump's been talking about this since his first term. So it's almost a whole decade. It still hasn't happened. Rasheed, go ahead. You can react to Angelo or add anything else you want to this topic of tariffs.
Yeah, the tariffs. I mean, the relocation of companies back to the United States. People don't understand that they have to be skilled. They have to have an educated base. That's what China did. They started educating their base, and they became more proficient at what they do. You just don't, some of this stuff, you just can't flip a switch and then they come back to the United States and be productive. We saw that in India, as the United States tried to hedge its best bets against China and move some of the factories to India, and realized that they were taking losses. So the corporations themselves had to come to an understanding with the United States government. Hey, we have to shut these plants down. We've been here for 3, 4, 5 years. We've got to go back to China. We're not making any headway. And so they took that chance and they lost in India, realizing that they had to come back to China, because even India didn't have the proficiently skilled workers to do certain things in certain industries. And as you said, this will take decades and not years, even though people say that it'll take years and not decades. I don't think they understand the skill level of certain things and the educational level. This is not going into McDonald's and flip, even though you have to have skills there. This is not going into McDonald's, being trained for a week and then becoming proficient. These things take months and years to do. And the United States doesn't have months and years for this because of her debt burden. It goes back to her debt burden. This is why her war plans are being pushed up against Iran. This is why she's now contemplating walling her economy off for a suicidal mission against China, because she understands that the time is against her economically. She's kicked down the economic can down the road for decades, and now we're at a dead-end street.
Yes, absolutely. And something else that came to mind while you were talking, Rasheed, was U.S. arms manufacturing for 3 years. So not 2 years. And we're not talking about building new factories. The U.S. has many existing arms factories. Just expanding production has completely failed over the course of now 3 going on to 4 years regarding this, not just the war, the U.S. war on Russia through Ukraine, but also delivering all the weapons they're trying to pour into places like Taiwan for a war with the rest of China. So when I see these comments, this is wishful thinking, fantastical thinking. That is not how America is going to solve their problems. They need to face reality. They need to look at what is really going on. And they need to, first of all, they have to ask themselves, what are they trying to achieve? And I'm looking at Project 2025, and they're talking about maintaining America's position as the world's greatest superpower when they're less than 5% of the global population, smaller population than China, smaller industrial base. We were just talking about millions more graduating, STEM graduates graduating in China than the US. How are you the most powerful nation? And why can't you just accept that you are smaller than China? China's time has come. Just accept your place within the world and the fact that you can no longer impose yourself upon the world. That is rational. And to fight this with this zero-sum confrontation mentality is, as you say, Rasheed, it's suicidal. Do either one of you have anything else you want to talk about regarding the tariffs before we start talking about? I want to. Yeah, go ahead, Angelo. Go ahead.
I'd like to add one. That's a topic. I mean, you probably know about this, but a lot of people, when they hear us, they think, you pro-Russia, pro-China, and so on. And actually, it's exactly the opposite. My biggest frustration is that you have, because of arrogance in the West, they're doing the mistake of, undervalue the rest of the world. because that there's a sense of superiority, and that's my frustration. It's because, well, we could be so much better. And I wish the best for the US. Even though I'm honest, I'm transparent. I hate the sense of superiority of like people like bumping their chest, and you know who I'm meaning. Brian, you and we've been talking about this, but this whole thing about, oh, we have the strongest army and we need to show the world that how good we are, and so on. And that's annoying. But I don't wish any bad. Really, I don't wish any bad things. What frustrates me, it's this arrogance that makes people ignorant. When you are arrogant, you become ignorant. You start, that's the foundation. The foundation of a strategy is know yourself and know your enemy. They do not even know themselves, and that is the problem. And the other problem is that they are powerful and they can harm the rest of the world. If they were stupid on their own, that's okay. I mean, that is okay, right? But you need to be a responsible power. And now, if you're using force like this, and you get frustrated like a baby that didn't get his a small kid that didn't get his toy and is no more the first in the class, and then you want to burn the whole class, and that's the behavior, and that's my frustration. It could be better. The US, I'm fine with the US doing well. Why should I be pro-China? Tell me. I have no, I'm happy in China and they treat me well, and I don't want to paint the place beautiful, but I have no critics about it. You see my point, and I have no reason to tell lies. I feel that in some ways I do like more the West than most Westerners that are warmongers, and they are arrogant, and they don't see that the only path is the multipolar world. I do believe that it's the same as if you have a friend who's is drunk, and if you're a good friend, you take the keys and you reason him, right? You just don't tell him you're the best one, and that's what those warmongers are doing.
Yes, Rasheed, do you have anything else you want to add to the topic on tariffs?
I was
get into.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was saying before, when the United States introduced the idea of placing tariffs on Mexico and on Canada, that this was a curveball, and the idea was to go after China. And just like I said, what is it? 54% tariffs, because 34, and then the 20 that they already put on them. This is a stealth attack against the Chinese economy, seeing that if they can bring any harm to China or make China yield to some concern, to some demands from the United States. All while you have to understand also that there's no honor among thieves. And the United States has been one of the greatest robber nations on the planet. And so when we look at what's going on in Germany and what's going on in Europe, America doesn't care. This is what people need to put in their mind. The American elite does not care about whether you're deindustrialized. It does not care about massive unemployment growing across Europe. What it cares about is the bottom line, is American hegemony. And if they have to sacrifice you through tariffs, through wars, through sanctions, then they are willing to make you their sacrificial lamb. And that's what I'm saying. All of this is a part of trying to, again, that quote that I said about Sun Tzu, all of this is about burning down the world in hopes that you can rule over the ashes. Because if they allow the world to continue the way it is, they understand that they will be outcompeted, and they will no longer be the hegemon, and this is unacceptable to them. And they will no longer control the international organizations or the levels of power over the world through the dollar currency regime, which is the world's reserve currency, and that's the life's blood of the empire. And that's also a way that the United States can export inflation and live above their means. They have ruled so long. They have this, I call it the king syndrome, where you have ruled so long that you become arrogant and drunk in your rule, especially when you see a new kingdom over the horizon saying, hey, listen, we're not going to take your dictates, and if war is forced upon us, then we'll go to war. And the Western leaders are saying, hell, what do we have to lose? We're losing our position anyhow. Let's just go at it. And maybe we can come out on top. And I think that is the thinking of the elite.
Absolutely. I think it's the perfect segue into talking about the peace negotiations with Russia, between the US and Russia, regarding Ukraine, and just the whole situation that Europe has found itself in the middle of. A lot of people say, well, this is and they're right. I mean, that Ukraine is a US proxy war with Russia, but it isn't just Ukraine. It extends across all of Europe. All of Europe has been roped into it, and all of Europe is paying the price. Just as you say, Rasheed, the US is feeding all of Europe into this proxy war, and they're out of Ukrainians, and now they're openly talking about sending European troops into Ukraine. And it's not, oh, Europe's doing this on their own to sabotage Trump. No, Trump's Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, I hate to keep going back to this, he publicly, very clearly said to Europe, you are sending these troops into Ukraine as peacekeepers, as part of guaranteeing any sort of ceasefire. And so you're absolutely right. They are willing to sacrifice all of Europe, Canada, everything. And look at every juncture the U.S. finds itself at. Who is paying the price for their policies? Is it ever Washington or Wall Street? Or is it always absolutely everyone else, including the American people? I always say the American people are among the first victims of U.S. empire. Mm-hmm. Although it's hard to say that when you're looking at Palestine or Yemen right now, or the situation in Ukraine. I mean, it's seriously victimized, and to such an extreme extent. But I just wanted to go over a few updates here real quick. Russia is hitting Ukraine with an unprecedented number of missile and drone strikes. They're avoiding energy infrastructure because they, in principle, agreed to that energy ceasefire with Trump, and because they only usually do that once a month anyway. But by the way, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, I thought they were dismantled. This is from today. So how's that happen? It's almost as if they lied to us and they just consolidated it all under the State Department, just like Policy Project 2025 said. I don't know. And then the New York Times is talking about Russian missile and drone bombardment. It is expanding. And this is the Kiev Independent. 23 missiles and 109 drones overnight. And they're admitting that Ukraine could only intercept 40-something out of these over 100 drones. So their air defenses are still in a state of collapse. Remember, they were saying they were taking out all of the more missiles and drones than Russia even claimed that they were firing during these volleys. And then what else was there? And then Ukrainian drones hit Russian explosives fiber optic factory near Moscow. Now this is what I really wanted to get to, because hold on, let's add Scott. Scott is his expertise is this conflict in Ukraine. So we'll get his take on this. Perfect time in Scott. So how is Ukraine able to strike these targets deep inside Russia? And I just want to go over these 3 articles from New York Times. This was from last year, the spy war, how the CIA secretly helps Ukraine fight Putin. And they admit from 2014 onward, not 2022 onward, 2014 onward, the CIA took over Ukraine's intelligence agencies. They are running Ukraine's intelligence agencies. They are running Ukraine's military decision-making. And then we have this one. When is this from? But this is, again, the secret history of the war in Ukraine, the untold story of America's hidden role in Ukrainian military operations against Russia's invading armies. And they admit every single aspect of everything Ukraine is doing is enabled by the United States. And then here, key takeaways from America's secret military partnership with Ukraine, because it's much deeper than the U.S. leads on. They act as if they're not a party to this war when in reality, they are fighting this war and they are doing it through Ukrainian intermediaries. This is a U.S. war on Russia, and and people will talk about these articles even right now, and then they act as if, well, somehow this has magically changed under the Trump administration, even though they admit this is still taking place. Ukraine is still able to reach targets deep inside Russian territory because the U.S. is enabling it every step of the way. So maybe we'll go in reverse. We'll start with Scott since he just showed up, and then we'll go to Rasheed and then Angelo. What is your take on the current status of the so-called peace talks? Before you came in, Scott, we were talking about how, and you know my position on this anyway. This is just U.S. stalling for time. They want to corner Russia, get them into a ceasefire, and freeze the conflict so they can take care of Iran and China in detail, and then circle back around to Russia. What is the latest from your perspective, Scott?
Well, I mean, over the past month, I think it's become relatively clear that the Russians are at least seeing through some of what the West is proposing. I've talked about this on my stream a bunch, but I don't know exactly who's running and controlling foreign policy right now in terms of Europe and the Middle East. But as the West is attempting to get a ceasefire in Ukraine, during the exact same period as they're trying to transition potentially to the Middle East and to China, you watch two ceasefires collapsing and not being abided by the West, who, is for all intensive purposes, at least ethnic cleansing, but likely committing a genocide in Gaza. So the Russians are looking at this, and you're saying, well, you obviously just lied about the ceasefire in Gaza. You went back on that immediately, unilaterally collapsed that ceasefire. You have never stopped striking Lebanon. So why would Russia be in a position to go into potentially a Minsk 3 sort of deal, especially when Minsk 1 and Minsk 2 went the exact same way that the ceasefires in the Middle East have just collapsed? I mean, you're looking, it's from my position, when you're talking about negotiating with the U.S., it's the best decision to make is almost just to not do it at all. And I think that's what Iran is doing right now. They've kind of put their foot down, and basically they're saying they're not going to do any direct negotiations with the United States. And this also seems to be the path that China's taking, and Russia has been taking this path for the last 3 or so years, I would say. And it's kind of shocking to me, honestly. I don't think at a single point throughout my life, I'm younger than all of you guys, I believe, I have never seen the U.S. actively be told no across the board like this. And I think that it's really beginning to show the immaturity of U.S. foreign policy and just the U.S. political elite. We just saw Marco Rubio come out today and basically stomp his feet around and protest about how Russia isn't, taking the negotiations seriously, this, that, and the other. Meanwhile, like Brian said, the U.S. is still actively supplying strike data to the Ukrainians for both HIMARS and Ukrainian deep strikes into Russia. Don't know how that perpetuates a ceasefire in any way. They are still actively delivering immense amounts of equipment and ammunition that continue to get Ukrainians killed and Russians killed every day. Doesn't really lend credence to any sort of ceasefire. And further than that, just you can listen to any of their talk. I mean, Brian always talks about Pete Hegseth. I've beat this horse dead. I can't talk about it anymore. On February 5th in Brussels, he talked about the division of labor, and nothing has varied from that original statement. They are following this track perfectly, and it doesn't appear to be any off ramps, any choice. And I would just like to say this to all of the people who are the big Trump supporters and Trump fans. Trump is systematically continued every single Biden era foreign policy decision, including striking Yemen, including the armament of Israel to strike Lebanon and Gaza, and the continued armament of Ukraine. So that's your non-interventionalist candidate right there.
Again, he did it again.
Yep.
He did that the first 4 years, and now he's doing it all over again. Hate to say it, but I told everybody so.
And I just would like to point out that the two illustrations of the U.S. strikes in Yemen working were potentially on some sort of, I'm not going to say they weren't combatants because I have no idea. It's a drone footage, black and white in the sky. But in Yemen, they tend to do these tribal circles, and that's exactly what this looked like. And when it was struck, the president comes out and brags about how he killed 70 people. In what, I mean, if he said something about them getting orders, like they met out in the sand to get orders on what ships to strike or something like that. I know how U.S. drone operations work, and I bet you there were a significantly more number of civilians in that circle than there were militants. Not only that, take it back a week, and you have the signal chat leak where they're openly bragging about collapsing an apartment building to kill a single human being. And it's just like this immense hypocrisy that to then go over to like the Ukraine situation where we just had a situation developing Krivoy Rog where a Russian missile was potentially shot down, an air defense missile failed, something like that happened, and 16 civilians died. And the West is making this big hoopla about how Russia isn't acknowledging a ceasefire, this, that, or the other. And then you're looking at Lebanon where hundreds of people die in 2 or 3 strikes. And it's just like, you can't make sense of it.
No. And just a moment, Rasheed, I just want to get this up. I constantly hear this. Now that the mask has fallen off and it's obvious Trump he lied to everybody. He lied to everybody again, and he's doing continuity of agenda again. Across the board, without exception. Trump is a lesser of two evils. No, he is literally the exact same evil because he is just a body there, just going through the motions, making you think that this is how power operates in the United States. It is the unelected think tanks who will hand anyone in the White House their foreign and domestic policy, whether it was Donald Trump or Kamala Harris. This is the evil you're more comfortable with. Let's just put it that way. This is the evil you're more comfortable with. It's not the lesser of two evils. This exact same progression was taking place under Biden, would have continued under Harris or Trump. And now Trump is proving that, yes, it will and is right now unfolding under him. Rasheed, we're talking about in general right now the U.S.-Russia thing, but if you want to branch out into something else, Scott.
Can I just hop in real fast?
Yes.
I was just going to say, to your point about the lesser of two evils, go to that signal chat and listen to who everybody claimed was the peace bringer and was going to tighten up the intelligence community. Nikki Haley actively cheering on that apartment building strike.
Tulsi Gabbard, but I don't blame you for mistaking her because they're all exactly the same.
Yes, I always do that. Not Nikki Haley, Tulsi Gabbard.
Okay, Rasheed, go ahead.
Well, I think, as Scott has said, that these people, you cannot negotiate. Again, you can't negotiate. And what you're seeing in real terms is the world is watching American policies, and just as if what Scott was talking about, and how they see that you can't negotiate, and how that America will not honor her word. Well, we're seeing the exact same thing with Israel and the United States. So I believe what this is a vetting out process for a new global order. And as one leadership shows its true colors, it's proven to the world that what we are in is unsustainable. So there must be something else that comes after this. And what it's also doing is showing us that American leadership, and I'm in America, so I'm letting people know that it's showing that it is not acceptable to lead the new world or the new order, because more people are wanting something more equitable, more fair, more just. And we're seeing that as every day passes by and every hour passes by, that America and her minions will do any and everything to continue on this. I would call it a vampire system, because it sucks the resources, the wealth, and the manpower out of other nations and bring back to the West so that they can live comfortable. And I don't think that is a viable system. And it's what we're looking at is the natural death of an untenable sustainable system that leeches off people and that discards people at the drop of a dime. The bombing of a circle of Yemenis, the killing of people in apartment blocks in Lebanon, the overthrow of governments, Syria, Libya, and all of this stuff. Under this rulership of the West, they've shown that they are not responsible leaders, and so the world has now rejected it, and this is what's causing all the turmoil. America wants to maintain her hegemony. The West wants to maintain its unfair advantages, and the world is reaching out for something better. And when what science tells us, when you have two objects heading to it, one must give way. And we're looking at it, the collapse of an entire system, but you see the leadership of that system fighting like hell to maintain its position. And there's going to be a lot of bloodshed, a lot of war, because America is not going to give up. Britain is not going to give up. The Western world is not going to give up. They're going to continue to do what they are doing to maintain what they have, because they believe that they have the God-given right to do it. Manifest destiny.
Absolutely. I just want to show people this real quick. I don't know if you can see this, but this is Tulsi Gabbard in her role as Director of National Intelligence. And she said this recently, as the U.S. has been right at the end of last month, even as the U.S. was mass murdering people or enabling mass murder all around the globe. She says President Trump is the president of peace. He is ending bloodshed across the world and will deliver lasting peace in the Middle East. It's psychotic. It's insane. And we keep hearing peace through strength. And what they actually mean is war. We're going to wage war pretending we're seeking peace. It's just been endless war since Trump came into office, and endless war since the turn of the century, and even before that. Angelo, go ahead.
Yes, it's Orwell. Let's go to war so we can better prepare for peace. It's hilarious, but sad at the same time. I would just go back. I think Scott had a very good point. I just wonder, this division of labor in the speech of Peter Exet. I think this is a defining moment. It's so important. But I even sometimes believe that maybe he did spill the beans without knowing it, because he actually completely exposed something that is extremely insider, that actually defines completely this as a peace. Those peace talk as being completely a clown show. It's completely a clown show, and in reality, they're all in. The U.S. is actually pretending to be closer to Russia, and the EU is pretending to be ditched by the U.S. And recently, I don't know if there's a budget. Von der Leyen, she wants a budget of over $800 billion or euro for the EU to rearm itself. And the US threatened the EU, saying, well, you need to buy US weapons. And so why would you want peace with Ukraine when you're pushing EU to raise their defense spending at 5%, and then you push them to buy US weapons? So it's all a clown show. So when I look from Putin perspective, of course, he's not going to agree to that. But he's smart. He's like, you want to talk to me? I'm not closing the door. Talk. You can talk. But you see, ultimately, he's got the card. He's got the cards, I mean, when you look at Trump, you see it's desperate. I don't know if you saw the last tweets. It's just like desperate about China. We are going to win and so on. And it's all self-suggestion. It's about the guy that is losing, and he becomes. You need to be quite careful about the one that is silent. He's pragmatic, he's silent. The one that is actually starting to shout and so on. Even in a fight, you've seen fights, right? Very often, the most dangerous is the one that is staying silent. And Putin is silent. It's like you can keep on talking. Guys, I have to go. It was a real pleasure. Scott, Rasheed, Brian. Well, let's keep it up next week. Yeah.
Yes. Have a good rest, Angelo. For those watching, you can find and follow Angelo. It's all in the video description below, and I will also add Scott's information at the end of the stream.
All right.
It'll all be. Take care, Angelo. Okay. So regarding Russia, this conflict in Ukraine, I still see Russia pushing forward with its strategy of attrition against Ukraine. Just continue to wear it down, continue dismantling these stockpiles of the collective West. This is going to cause problems for the collective West with their ambitions, say in the Middle East or against China as well. And I was watching them moving THAAD units from the Asia Pacific region to the Middle East because they don't have enough. They don't have enough to go all around. They have this global military ambition. They don't have enough to go around. And this is the reason why they so desperately want a ceasefire in Ukraine, so that they can move it to where they need it, get the job done, and then bring it back. And at the same time, and Angelo was making the point that maybe Secretary Hegseth wasn't supposed to say that all publicly. Just, it was the whole plan. But I want to point out something, that despite him saying that publicly, despite all these policy papers being available for years and years and years, spelling out everything in excruciating detail, people don't read it. They don't listen. Sometimes they listen to it and it just doesn't sink in, and they will still, through wishful thinking, want to believe that no, Trump wants peace. People in his own administration are undermining him. Europe is undermining him. Zelensky is undermining him. But the reality is that was the plan. That is the plan. That is what they're doing. This is why Russia isn't falling for it. We can talk more about the conflict in Ukraine, or I guess that really is. Scott, because you just came in, do you have anything you want to say about the tariffs? Because we began this by talking about the tariffs, and I was talking about how I think the U.S. is walling itself off and preparing for significant economic pain at home. I've heard people say, well, this will be temporary pain. It's already been going on for 8 years since the initial tariffs were introduced. You're in the United States. Rasheed, you're in the United States. My family is still in the U.S. I talk to them. All they talk about is the cost of living spiraling out of control. So what is, Scott, what is your take on these tariffs being launched, and what are you anticipating?
Yeah, so this is something that I've been mulling over a little bit, and I think part of the problem with how some analysts are approaching not only the tariffs, but just everything that the U.S. is doing in terms of foreign policy is sort of based off of a post-Cold War mindset. And I think that the world is rapidly evolving, and we are about to enter a completely different time period, not only in like the U.S. empire state, but just in global power dynamics. And part of that, being the hegemony that we are, we're going to try to hold on to it, obviously, and maintain that. I think that the tariffs and the aggressive foreign policy that you're seeing, that at least militaristic foreign policy that you're seeing, is just a sign of what is really to come, and not so much. It feels like this is a very unstable period right now because of everything that's happening, but I think that this is just kind of the norm now. And the sort of instability is going to be a very regular thing. And this is what I was talking about with the tariffs specifically. I don't necessarily, I'm not a great economics guy. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know everything about tariffs and whatnot. And I'm not going to say that it's the best way to go about things, because I don't know. But I think that it is almost the natural progression for the United States that we have to now hunker down. And like, again, the division of labor thing is specifically designed for this. It's so that the U.S. can isolate and focus on a specific opposition, which would be China, and Europe controls Europe, controls Russia and that sphere of influence, and then Israel controls the Middle East. And that's really what I think is going on. So when you're talking about tariffs, I'm being very cautious right now, because I think that the old world rules are being applied to these tariffs and are being applied to the foreign policy currently. And I don't think the old world rules apply anymore.
Yes. And I also want to point out, and this is something that I think I will do a whole video about in the future, is artificial intelligence. I I don't think people, if they're not involved in it, I don't think they understand how transformative it actually is. Like I have been starting to get into it. I used to do industrial design, and I've been working on projects with artificial intelligence that are allowing me to do entire projects in a day that would have taken me a week or a month to do. And if that's me just on my own, what is that doing organizationally in the United States, in China, in Russia? And I always like how the US says they're going to use AI to level the playing field against China, as if China and other countries don't also have AI. So it's just so unpredictable because it's changing so quickly to the point where people don't even know what the current state of the art actually is. I want to talk about these protests that we see in the US, the hands-off protests. It's just the initial beginning of it. They're obviously organized and centrally funded. It's pretty obvious. But if President Trump is working for the deep state, why is the deep state organizing protests against President Trump? And I'll tell you why. It just seems so obvious to me. You already see people waking up to Trump. I was watching Judge Napolitano talk with Professor Jeffrey Sachs, who had both been very supportive of President Trump. And when President Trump laid out these tariffs, they just said, has he lost his mind? What is he thinking? And so when you have people who are that supportive of President Trump, extending their good faith and will toward him, and then questioning it so publicly, you create an emergency. You create a threat that targets Trump, and you make the most obnoxious, from the point of view of Trump supporters, something so offensive and so obnoxious that they put their doubts and the criticisms aside, and they just circle the wagons around the Trump administration. A strategy of tension to divide and distract people away from the fact that Trump works for the deep state. The deep state is going to create an artificial threat to him to rally people around him rather than allow them to continue waking up. I would say relatively fast. Like this was very, very fast. I thought, it would be at least a couple of months before people would realize the things that I was saying were true. And I had people for like a couple of weeks say, Brian, have you lost your mind? Brian, you have Trump derangement syndrome. I followed you for years and I'm going to unfollow you now because, and now they're all like, I can't believe I fell for Trump. It was like in record time, people are waking up. So that's what I think the protests are aiming to achieve. Rasheed, what do you think?
If you permit me, I want to go back to what Scott was saying about the division of labor real quick. The division of labor when it comes to the Middle East, I think it's a little different. I don't think America will leave Israel to do the bidding alone because Israel cannot confront Iran on a one-on-one situation militarily. It doesn't have the capability. I believe that the reason that America is really trying to come up with some type of, I won't say peace deal, I'll say just a deal that will allow her to extricate herself at the present time so that she can focus on China. I think that before she focuses on China wholeheartedly, she has to get rid of this Iranian problem. Yeah. And this Iranian problem has a lot to do with China because I often say that Iran is the underbelly of Russia, China, Pakistan, and India. And if you look at what took place with Russia, NATO didn't just confront Russia and Ukraine. It was a strategy over decades to pick off former Soviet territories around the outlier of Russia, and then to encroach upon Russia's sphere of influence, and then to weaken Russia's alliances around there, and then to bribe Russia's closest allies, which were Georgia and which were Ukraine. They could not do. They tried to do it in Belarus or Belarus, but they couldn't completely do it. And after, so that's when they put the full press move in Ukraine to try to take Russia. I believe this is the same thing that is going on with when Hakes was talking about the division of labor. They at this moment, what was it? The general came out and said that America is not in a position to confront China head on in the Asia Pacific. So what do? You attack all of the choke points economically and all of her allies in West Asia, and the major ally is Iran. So if you can get Iran, you can stop the Belt and Road. You can have a somewhat say over China's rise. And I believe we can't leave that out, because I don't think that the U.S. will openly confront China at the moment, because she has to weaken China a little bit more first. And I think Iran is that prime object that she's looking for to make war with, to weaken, not only because she gets a twofer. If she weakens and beats Iran, she weakens Russia, she weakens China, and then that'll soften them up for America's final push to try to bring China to yield and double back on Russia. And that's what I had to say about that one. So I'm sorry if I took it, but I heard what Scott said, and I had to go back to that because he's absolutely right on that division of labor.
Yeah, and I
go ahead, Scott.
I just wanted to say, to your point, that I definitely meant after the regime in Iran was taken out. That's when Israel takes over the Middle East as the division of labor, sort of.
Yes.
As far as that goes. To Brian's point about the protests, I just think this is the same internal division stuff that they use all the time. It's much easier to, control a group when you keep them divided between each other. And that's exactly what I see here. I actually have this theory that almost no protests in the United States are organic. I don't see any organic protesting since like maybe COVID. And I don't mean organic as in, I mean like the protests against the COVID lockdowns is what I mean by like that seemed not paid for. Whereas every single other protest I see, if it has anything to do with politics, is always everybody there seems bought and paid for and almost completely clueless about the reason why they're there. And so I see these as just another means of control. It's just a way to divide and keep us distracted. If we're fighting with each other, we're not fighting them, sort of deal.
Exactly. And I just want to add one more thing to what Rasheed was saying, and then we could get to questions and answers. So, like there's only 15 of them, but we can do that. That'll last about an hour or so. Anyway, you're talking about Iran, taking Iran out and how it's related to China. We have to remember how much of hydrocarbons going into the Chinese economy originate from the Middle East. And a conflict with Iran is going to disrupt that. Plus, Iran itself is exporting hydrocarbons to China, to its economy. And so this would be hugely disruptive to China. And Rasheed, you were talking about not just hitting the Middle East and cutting off hydrocarbons to China, but all of these maritime choke points worldwide. And this is what brings us back to the tariffs. People were telling me when we were talking about this on stream after stream, all of these choke points, talking about Greenland and Panama, people in the comment section kept saying the U.S. would never do that. It would collapse the whole global economy. Now we see the U.S. walling its economy off from the entire world. So what do people think is being set up here? So I think if there's one thing I would want to close on before we get to questions and answers, it would be that it's that the U.S. its only way of solving problems is death and destruction. I think they've made that abundantly clear over the last century or so. And they have the biggest problem. And so they are preparing death and destruction on the largest scale imaginable. So that's where I think we'll leave it. I'm sure there's going to be questions that touch on all of these. So we'll all get a chance. So you guys can jump in at any moment, just maybe like put your hand up so I'll stop talking and let you guys. I didn't read these yet. Do you think that Trump's tariffs could ultimately lead to Vietnam, Japan, and South Korea all joining BRICS? I think that's what Angelo was talking about, forcing all of these nations to conclude the U.S. is unreliable, being connected to the U.S. economy is dangerous. But again, if all of these countries do that and they cut off the United States and the U.S. is becoming more and more self-sufficient, this will allow the U.S. to, with more latitude, cause global murder and mayhem. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on.
I just think that there are certain places like Vietnam. Maybe Vietnam is not as under the U.S. thumb, I would say, as some other of those countries, Japan and South Korea specifically. I don't see their political processes having any ability to pull away from the U.S. The alternative right now is China. Unless there is literally a regime change in Japan or a massive zeitgeist shift, These places have been under U.S. control since World War II. Their politics, their economies are so interconnected with the United States that it's practically impossible, I would say, barring a complete collapse of the current political class. And, you get new people in there, which I guess could be possible if there's major economic downturn. But yeah, no, I don't think that. I think that the U.S. is pretty much locked down what it wants, and it has a direction in which it's going to go. I don't think that direction is working out, going according to plan at all since Trump got into office. I think that they had a very clear path forward, and I think that started with the ceasefire in Ukraine. And I think Russia's inability to, or not inability, but not, what would I say? They don't want to negotiate right now. They're not in a position to negotiate, especially a ceasefire, a temporary ceasefire, something like that. That puts a drain on, the U.S. So they're still focused on Europe. They're focused on the Middle East right now, and I'm waiting to see if they're going to escalate that situation because they have to do something. It feels like they're running out of time. I'm waiting for something to happen around Panama, something to happen around Greenland, or something to happen in the South China Sea. And I wanted to say too, it's funny that everybody looks at China and the South China Sea as being this hyper aggressive nation that's like, taking over all of this territory with the, is it the 7- line or 9- line?
9-
line. That whole, you look at that and you're like, wow, they're being really aggressive out in that ocean or whatever. And then you look at the maritime shipping lanes and how restricted they could be and how damaging that would be to the Chinese economy. And then you look at who is attempting to constrict that, and it's the country on the opposite side of the Pacific. And then it makes China's activity in the South China Sea seem not so aggressive, and it makes the Ukraine situation seem not so aggressive. So that was just a point I wanted to make. I don't think you're going to see any of these vassal countries flip until the economic situation is so bad, or the U.S. does something almost unforgettable to a vassal, like a European country or something, and then the whole narrative just shifts.
Yes, I like that point about the South China Sea. And again, people forget that even these countries the U.S. is encouraging to fight with China over the South China Sea, they themselves depend on the free flow of goods to and from China specifically for their economy. So it's just such an insane inversion of reality that the U.S. has managed to convince so many people around the world, including in this region, because of their control over global media and nations, even here in Southeast Asia, especially, their inability to secure their own information space.
It's one of the things that the U.S. has, like, this incredible ability. People regularly underestimate the U.S. when it comes to I would say the opposing voices. I guess almost what we would call us, right? The people that we're talking to, the English speaking audience who's not completely, I would say, propagandized to the point where they, either don't have the time to understand what's happening or they can't see what's happening around them. They start to get this attitude that the U.S. is weak. The U.S., because the U.S. isn't winning right now, somehow the U.S. doesn't have the strength or the veracity to do these things that need to be done to maintain hegemony. And I just think that is a false illusion. I think that the U.S. will go to the ends of the earth to maintain its hegemony. And I would caution a lot of the people who are, people like, the Z people, like that's in the Ukraine. I just deal with Ukraine specifically. So I see it a lot. A lot of the pro-Russian groups will completely, undersell the U.S. in what they're capable of doing. And the point of this is that the U.S., their superpower is their ability to get other nations to commit suicide for them. I've never seen this throughout like history. There are very few times where I've seen vassal states that will just fall on the sword for literally no personal gain, or they fell on the sword for a lie of personal gain. But after you've seen it happen to the Kurds, the ANA, the Arvin, why would the AFU sign up for that? I don't get it. But it is a US soft power is an unreal weapon, and they use it handily.
Which is why they did not dismantle any of it, which is why they consolidated it under the State Department.
We didn't think it was going away. They told us it wasn't.
So, some people labor under that delusion. All right, this is semi-related to what we were just talking about. How important are Iranian resources to China's economy? I think we just talked about that. Hydrocarbons going to China. This is very important for China. It's also very important for Iran. And as I always say, U.S. success destabilizing, dividing, destroying any nation anywhere makes it more likely to happen everywhere else. So this is all tied together. There's this one. To what extent does the U.S. as a country suffer from the personality disorder known as the dark triad? And they're referring to being impulsive, cold, remorseless, manipulative, self-interested, domineering. The narcissism, essentially. You're the center of the universe. And again, I just want to tell people, please go watch the congressional hearings. Listen to the people in Congress at these committees and the think tankers they bring in. They are the personification of the dark triad, and that is who is running the U.S. And this mentality is cultivated among Americans themselves deliberately, so that they are, when they hear about, hey, let's grab Greenland, people are like not immediately repulsed by it and saying, what are you talking about? The fact that didn't happen says a lot about the mindset of too many Americans, I would say.
I think like I said, sort of the entering into the new era of history, really, where I think we are officially now, I think like 2020 to 2025 was the end of the post-Soviet time period. So 1991 until like that 30-year period. And I think we are like just getting out of that. And it's wild that the international rules-based order that the West has talked about so much. I mean, 3 years ago, they were absolutely moaning and groaning about Russia being in Crimea and then entering the country further, Ukraine further. And then Trump gets into office and we're talking about taking over Greenland for literally, I mean, there is a reason, but Greenland is not an enemy. I'm sure Greenland can be dealt with in a way where the U.S. can maintain that shipping lane without taking over the country. But now it's okay for a country to go in and, take over another country because it's just Greenland or whatever. And it's just like the utmost of hypocrisy. And I think this goes to part of that dark triad thing is the American ability to just shrug things off, just forget things happen and move on and, almost cope with the situation is wild. And I think it comes from a place of immense ignorance for the most part. I think the U.S. population is incredibly uneducated when it comes to what their government is doing. And I think that's by design. So yeah, I think that whole dark triad thing is a very realistic representation of not only the U.S. I'm just going to say this. Anybody who strives to be at the top of any political class is probably somewhere in that little Venn diagram, because it takes a specific kind of person to not only enter politics, but rise through politics and get to the top of politics in any political system. So I've always said that, when you're talking about Israel, I always refrain from talking about Jews because people will always make it a Jewish thing. And I say that Benjamin Netanyahu does not believe in any holy book. He does not care about the Bible, any of this. They do not care. They are psychopaths, sociopaths, whatever you want to call it, that have entered into a cutthroat industry, the most cutthroat industry, the dirtiest industry in all of human history, and they succeed there. I mean, what kind of people do they have to be? That's what I say about that.
Yes, and And I noticed in myself over the many years how I had to deprogram myself as an average American when I came to Thailand. And Thai people, ordinary Thai people, do not think like this. They have a completely different way of thinking. And I learned from that. Luckily, I mean, I am a better person because of it. But Rasheed, you're in the United States. You interact with Americans obviously all the time. What is your take on this question regarding this concept of the dark triad and why it's so prevalent in the United States?
I believe most people in the United States prefer illusion to despair. And I believe that is one of the reasons why they maintain this hope on the dual party system. My candidate is better than yours. And I think that the establishment, they dumb down the people on purpose so that they can exploit them, as Scott said, so that they can rule. If I'm focused on you, Scott, then I can't focus on the people still in my land, still in my rights, still in this. And I believe that is a big part of it. And they tell you this. This is why the educational system is lacking. The things that are allowed. People can't even write cursive. I didn't even know that until a year ago. They took that out of the school system, that you don't even have to. Well, if you can't write cursive, how can you sign your name? You can only, signing means writing in cursive. And so these little things, the destruction of the educational system is done purposely so that they can dumb down the what would be opposition to their irrational, deluded policies, and to keep them in power. But they don't understand that by doing this, they're collapsing the American empire, because it is education, proper education, which civilizes the people. And we can see right now, go to any neighborhood, go to any city, go to any area in America, and we can see savagery everywhere. The people are savages. They'll kill you over shoes. They'll kill over everything is material based, just like the government. It permeates from the top down. America wants to steal your resources. The civilians want to steal your clothes. You're not safe in your home. People will threaten you over minute stuff and kill. All of that stuff is a sign of a decaying and collapsing a nation and empire. And I don't think people understand that education is the base of any civilization. If you dumb down that educational system, then it may not happen right then and there, but over a time of years to decades, you're going to collapse your empire. And that's why America is so mad at China, because China has put so much emphasis on education, and they're graduating all of these engineers and scientists, and America cannot compete with that because she is too busy trying to force feed her democracy around the world, her educational system around the world, and people are not buying it anymore because all you have to do is look at the product. Look at the product. Go to America or look on TV and look at the product. I don't want that, and I believe that meltdown in the halls of power, because they have ruled so succinctly and so long that they think that if they could just maintain this just a little bit longer, they can come up with something new. And they're willing to sacrifice Europe, they're willing to sacrifice Americans, and they're willing to sacrifice the world to try to put their policy over, because the deep state doesn't care about you. They care about power, they care about money, and that's what it's all about.
And let me just tell you, as somebody who has been very close to the U.S. education system, not only myself going through it and recently getting out of it, but also working inside of it for some time, the U.S. education system has been dumbed down and broken for decades. This is not a new thing. This is not something that Biden did or Trump did. This has been. I mean, listen, I'm just going to tell a personal story here. When I was in elementary school, I got to 4th grade. And when I was in 4th grade, I had my awakening moment. I went into a parent-teacher conference and I had less than good grades in 4th grade, which is ridiculous. And I passed my standardized test. And when I passed my standardized test, they said, oh, your grades don't matter. You can go on to the next grade. And this is where I really began to understand that the education system was broken, because for the next, I would say, I was in 4th grade until I was a senior in high school. I didn't do anything. I learned on my own. I learned some in class, but as long as I continued passing standardized tests, I was advanced to the next grade. And I worked out okay because I stayed up to where I was supposed to be, but we are failing kids successfully. Like we're pushing kids through that should not be getting pushed through. And this is a more, isolated sort of conversation when we're talking about U.S. education, but it really does affect your ability to, first off, think logically, just your critical thinking skills. It is wild when I talk to kids these days. They don't seem to think about what the implications of something are. There's no forward thinking. It's all surface level. And it's because they've never been told they need to think. They don't have to. They have everything in front of them. They're told everything that they need to do. Why should they waste their energy thinking critically or rationally? And it usually makes you unhappy, right? Like I am consistently very depressed and sad because I have a basic understanding of what's going on in the world, and it's extremely depressing. So why, like Rasheed said, you choose blissfulness and ignorance over the despair of reality and the facts.
I think we could probably do a whole show on just this alone.
Yeah.
I mean, especially the three of us, where all three of us are Americans, and are in one way or another products of the system. How is controlled opposition a threat to your struggle for truth, and how do you vet your sources? I mean, controlled opposition is a threat. I mean, it depends on what you mean by controlled opposition. Controlled opposition to the system, pretending that it opposes the system, when in reality it's cognitive infiltration. It poses as alternative media, but it's repackaging establishment propaganda and feeding it to people. That was a literal paper Cass Sunstein wrote and was implemented from Obama onward. Scott?
Yeah, I would just say, think about 9/11. And this is not necessarily controlled opposition, but after the 9/11 attacks, after everything had settled, was there any fear really that was going to happen again? I mean, there was the fear that another 9/11 might happen, but U.S. global security was raised through the roof. Another attack like this probably wasn't going to happen, but the U.S. still used this event, right, and used it to pass the Patriot Act, used it to pass these things, which furthered the U.S. ability to control their population, control the narrative, control which direction, U.S. foreign policy goes, everything like that. There was no new threat. The Patriot Act did not need to be passed. They could have passed things that protected the airlines. They could have, done different little things here, but they used it, and then they went on the global war on terror. So, I mean, controlled opposition is a very, very useful thing. And when you can pay specifically liberals, and this is not a shot at liberals, but it does seem to be the Democrats in the United States, when you can pay a bunch of unemployed Democrats to go out and protest, you control that opposition. That opposition is under your thumb. They're not doing anything that you're not telling them to do in these protests. They're saying the exact same lines, the same messages. And if you ask any of them, none of them know why the hell they're even out there protesting.
Yeah, and that goes back to it's not just the controlled opposition, it's how people react to it, thinking that it's genuine and not realizing that they're being manipulated by it. And about vetting sources, I mean, the truth is the truth. And if you know how to search for the truth, if you know how to do sound analysis, it doesn't matter what the source is. I almost exclusively use Western media as my sources because I'm not trying to convince people that already watch, like, say, RT or CGTN or something like that, people that don't buy Western media at all. I'm trying to convince people who consume Western media, and I'm showing them that even Western media is saying this. If you look carefully, you can see them burying it at the bottom of all of their articles. You can see it in the think tanks themselves. And so what it really comes down to is knowing how to separate propaganda from actual facts, knowing what a fact is, understanding enough about the world, how it actually works, to know what is a fact and what is just nonsense trying to be sold to you. So it's hard to kind of sum up what an analysis does, but it's kind of like that. It's kind of like that. Hold on, let's go with it. Yeah, I guess you guys want to. Hold on a second. Anyone that wants to bail out, you're more than welcome. You don't have to sit here.
No.
And I'm getting through them faster than I thought. What will be the end result of tariffs hysteria? I think we talked about that quite a bit. You know that people always hype the stock market going up and down. That is all speculation. That has nothing to do with the real value of these companies or the general health of the economy. And it almost always balances out over time. What you need to look at is the cost of living. Look at the cost of living, because when the stock market balances out, Trump will be like, see, it's back up higher than ever. But what about your cost of living? How's that? Has that lowered? Are you doing better now? Do you pay less on your rent and your grocery bills, or are you paying more and more and more every single month, as everyone I talked to in the U.S. has been for the last 8 years or more?
Yeah, it's funny listening to everybody talk about the stock market. It was also hilarious. People will use anything to further their narrative or whatever. So, you have the anti-Trump people that are obviously going to come out and say, oh, look, the funny one for me was Bitcoin. You have this fake currency that is not really based on anything. Like, I mean, it is based on something, but it's not a physical backed currency. And neither is the US dollar, but at least the US is there to back it. And then you see it drop from $120,000 to $80,000, and people were losing their marbles, the crypto crash, this, that, or the other. And I'm like, it's $80,000 still. This is the same thing with the stock market. It's this huge bloated monster, and it looks so good. All the green and everything, it appeals to our monkey brain. And then you see the red, and people don't really understand what it even means, other than they're temporarily losing money that they actually don't have physically. And it's just a very odd thing to focus on when, like you said, Brian, there's cost of living. There's I want to know how much a tank of gas is going to cost me, because I have to fill up my car every 2 weeks or so. That is going to be a regularly reoccurring bill. And if my gas is $3 a gallon instead of $2.50, that's going to negatively impact my life far more than how Raytheon is doing on the stock market.
And Rasheed, I want to ask you about cost of living. I mean, whatever you feel like talking about. All I know is when I'm talking to the family back in the U.S. and where I'm talking about the cost of living here in Thailand, it's like we're living in alternate universes, because everything is, and the government here, you get different administrations coming and going, but there's a deep state here that genuinely is looking out for people's interests. There's the government pharmaceutical organization. There's universal health care that ensures that absolute essentials are available to absolutely everyone, no matter what your economic situation is. And Thailand is not some superpower on the global stage. It's just a normal country that is, I always compare it to a plot of farmland. Thailand is a plot of farmland that has farmers that are trying to run it the best they can. They have ups and downs, but that's what they're doing. The U.S. is like a plot of farmland that the farmer left, is on vacation, and a swarm of locusts just flew in and is just eating everything. Rasheed, what can you tell us, as much as you want to tell us, about cost of living, say over the last 8 years, and what you think tariffs are going to do to it into the future?
Whoa, man. Shrinkflation. We're experiencing shrinkflation, where they try to make you think that less is more. They have the little commercials now where they show you some pods of washing detergent like this, and you'll get a 4 or 5 in there, and it's like $15, when at one time you could get a gallon of laundry detergent for like $3. And they're telling you that these things are more powerful, and it plays to the psyche of people. People don't realize the little tricks that they're playing on them to mask the inflation. You go to the store where you could get four or five candy bars in a pack. it's 4. I mean, 6 candy bars in the pack. They're 4 now, and they're smaller. And you know, when I go in the store, even though some of the stuff that I look at I don't buy because I don't eat it, I do take note of the shrinkage and the amount that's in there, and with the curves in the cans or the water bottles at the bottom, so that they can make it seem like it's still the same size, but they're drawing out about this much more because of the little curve in the bottle. All of that is to mask inflation, because what people don't know is that the dollar has lost 97% or 98% of its value, and it's continuing to tank. It has no sound backing behind it, gold or silver. The only thing that backs the dollar is the threat of U.S. military intervention. And we see more nations around the world are saying, you know what, let's do currency swaps, because this capitalistic idea that America is trying to impose on us it hasn't proven to be to our benefit. And it continues to keep America living above her means while we're suffering through inflation that she's exported to us. So now nations are saying, you know what, forget that. We're going to currency swap, and that weakens the dollar even more. We're going to do trade deals outside of the dollar that weakens the dollar even more. And in the midst of all of that, instead of the government getting their act together and say, hey, we can do better by people, even though our economy is collapsing, maybe if we treat people better, maybe if we look at these nations in a better light and stop trying to overthrow the country, stop trying to wage war against them, maybe in the day of our downfall, they will have sympathy for us to stop the complete collapse. But instead, we're doubling down on failed policy, which is bringing inflation back home to roost, and you're paying for a box of cereal. I believe it's like what, $7 here. 10 years ago, you could get 4 dozen eggs for $1. You can go out to the swap meet and get 4 dozen eggs, and now a dozen eggs cost $7. $7 for a dozen
That's
eggs.
insane.
This shows you the state of the economy.
And part of it is not only that it's getting more expensive, but real wages haven't gone up. So that's the point.
Yeah.
If it's $7, but everybody's making $24 an hour, I mean, that doesn't, I mean, there's obviously the negative economic implications there, but at least it would be proportional. The, minimum wage hasn't gone up that much compared to the prices going up. So sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Right. No, go ahead, because you're making excellent points, Scott. I mean, this is crazy. So your pay is not matching the inflation rate, which is a killer for people. Now people have to make choices between medicine and gas to get to work. If you don't get gas to go to work, you can't pay your bills. And then you have insurance, health insurance, or insurance for your car.
Yeah, and I mean, if
go
you
ahead.
look at
I know you wanted
prices,
to say some stuff. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I have. If you look at like rental prices, I mean, I'm in real estate, so this is what I look at all day. The price to rent a house, which should be the most accessible form of home ownership, in my personal opinion, because I think of it as a good intermediary state, because owning a house is very expensive for people in their 20s and stuff. Yes. Like people in their, like if you're saving up to buy a house, like if that's your goal, renting is not necessarily a bad thing. You just don't want to stay in it forever because you're not putting equity into it. Completely pointless to the discussion, but the price for renting is like 400% of what it was 20 years ago. The price of a house is so wildly inflated, and they say it's because we have a housing shortage, which is a complete crock of shit. We do not have a housing shortage. What we have is private companies owning massive amounts of single residential homes, and that's what's cranking up the prices. So, I mean, they're just lying to you. They want to control you. They want you to not be able to have freedom of movement. That's energy prices going up. You're not going to be able to go where you want to. Plane tickets are going to be more expensive than anything else ever. You're not going to be able to fly. They're going to control everywhere you go. They're going to control what you eat, when you eat it, because everything's going to be so expensive that the U.S. political elite can do things like you were talking about, Rasheed, to fix the situation. If they weren't in the dead center of that dark triad, they would do something to help the American people, because if you help the American people, your empire is going to be stronger, right? But this is not something that they care about, because they are users, they are manipulators, they do not care about what happens after them. They only care about them succeeding right now in what they're doing, and this is why they will completely abandon any sort of self-respect or their own moral compass, if they have one. They don't. That's why they're there. And they'll lobby whenever they'll lobby for the Raytheon, for any military industrial complex. They'll cheer. You have Tulsi Gabbard cheering on, literally striking Yemen, which it has to be the easiest position for her to say this is not okay. Of her entire spiel about ending wars and not being interventionists and all of this, Yemen should be the easiest spot to say, hey, let's not do this. If she was still on board with Ukraine, I would be critical of her, but I would say, hey, at least it's like something that they kind of fell into. They are by themselves going after Yemen, and Nikki Haley. God damn, man. Well, I don't know what it is with that. I can't lose that. Every time.
They all look the same. Everyone in Washington just looks like a blob of flesh with hair, just spewing toxic.
I've done that Nikki Haley, Tulsi Gabbard thing with you, Brian, I think before in the past as well.
We know what you mean. Rasheed, you have something?
Yeah, I want to say, I rented an apartment back in the 90s, and it was $325. I don't know. I'm a real estate agent by trade also. So now I went back to that apartment just by accident, and I found out that apartment rents for $2,000.
Yep.
It's a 2-bedroom apartment. $2,000. And like I said, in the 90s, it was roughly about $300 to $325 when I rented it. I haven't rented a home in a long time, like a few decades now. But that shows you the inflation in everything. Think about that. That is almost 7 times as much as I paid for it, as I was paying for it. Now, and then the people are telling me that they have to choose very careful about what they buy to eat, because they need to have money just in case the car breaks down or something like that. This is in the midst of the nation that claims to be the richest nation in the world. How can you on one hand claim to be the beacon of hope and you want everybody to aspire to be like you, and at the same time you're crushing the livelihoods and the hopes of the citizens in America through inflation and I would call it being parasitic? Because do you notice every time they go into a nation, they do the same thing? They like you were talking about Thailand, and you said that healthcare, that is the free healthcare, the universal healthcare, that is unacceptable in America. That's why when they went into Libya, they destroyed the healthcare system. That's what they did in Iraq. Everywhere they go, it has to be for profit. And then they want to tell you this is the way to be. And I asked them, because they always talk about being a Christian nation. I said, would Jesus do that? Would Jesus do that?
Yeah.
I mean,
that's a bad question to ask people in the West, man.
It's just like you were saying, Scott, about Netanyahu being, Jewish. I mean, he's just a psychopath. He hides behind religion. That's what people in the West do.
Think about, just for people listening, think about how powerful religion is. Think about, if you are a religious person, think about how much that means to you, how much that is involved in your life, how much that means to your life, right? I mean, it's literally your afterlife if you believe in it. Why wouldn't a psychopath use that to manipulate everybody? It's
Yes.
for all of human history. The
No-brainer.
literal term for it is opiate of the masses, because people will do anything if they're, if they believe in something, and religion is just so powerful. And just like anything else, just like money, just like anything else, it can be corrupted and it can be used for horrible, nefarious reasons. And I think that's usually what you see. Claiming that you can bomb children in Gaza because of the Holocaust is a crazy thing. And that's another one, is like just using the term Holocaust is so powerful in the West specifically, that you can't even criticize ethnic cleansing, which is exactly what they're complaining about having happened to them. It's wild. It's crazy.
I think we could probably do a whole show on that too.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to have I don't think I'm going to have a hard time picking topics for quite a while here. So I did hear about this. I didn't look into the details, but they were talking about Russia and China were talking about some sort of joint defense entity. Well, we don't know. We don't know what that means. But does that sound like Russia or China are falling for any of the nonsense that the Trump administration is, or at least was before they openly went full empire, talking about remember Rubio talking about, oh, we're in a multipolar world, and he made people think that maybe the U.S. is thinking about finding a constructive role to play. Yeah, Rubio of all people. Again, like they'll just say anything they have to hook you and to kick the can down the road.
It's just crazy that all of the Republicans that were or the MAGA that are so pro-Trump, Rubio, weren't they enemies? Like,
yes,
8 years ago, like they were literally.
Scott, do you remember when the rumor first started going around that Trump was going to pick Rubio, and all the MAGA people were like, it's not true. It's just a rumor to smear Trump. And then it was like a 1,000,000,000% true. That was his pick. And now he is. And then all of these people rewired their whole brain from Rubio is toxic, don't touch him with a 10-foot pole, to rationalizing that this guy is somehow good, and what he's saying has any value at all, and he's not just they're not just lying to everybody and exploiting them. It's not, because it's not just religion, it's political ideology, it's what people are identifying with or hoping for. They prey on all of this, and it's so depressing to watch.
I feel like
go ahead.
Literally, like, for me, just for those that don't know, I know I'm bald and old looking, but I'm 27. I was basically born yesterday. How can I see through this stuff? How is there? If you've been around on this earth for 50 years, you've been watching U.S. politics, you watched Joe Biden come into politics. Like, if you've been around that long, how do you not see this? How do you not see that they lie and change their position so dramatically, and then again instantly change their position back? The Rubio one is crazy to me. Listening to him talk about multipolar world was just, I was sitting there and I was like, this is a TV show. I'm watching a alternate reality TV program where Rubio is now some dove talking about the U.S. retreating from its global position and letting Russia and China take up a mantle somewhere. Are you guys fucking kidding me? Like, what are we talking about?
Also, him just admitting that there's a multipolar world coming into shape doesn't mean he accepts it. And obviously they don't, because everything that they have actually done versus what they claimed they were going to do is trying to reassert themselves and their system on the world here. I think this is a good question. In your view, how's the S&P 500 connected to U.S. imperialism? What will the long-term effects be of U.S. decline globally? Experts say market always goes up, but it's based on U.S. hegemony, right? So what I always tell people is that the U.S. special interests are these corporations. They are the large, deeply entrenched corporate monopolies. They have thrived for decades by being the only show in town, not having to innovate, not having to compete with anyone else, being able to club competition over the head and maintain their monopoly. They're freaking out now because, and this was their whole plan, was to send manufacturing to China, subordinate China, and make that America's factory, prey on the cheap labor there indefinitely. And what China did was move out from under that build their own companies that are now out competing these deeply entrenched, uncompetitive monopolies. They cannot compete, and they don't want to compete. They want to maximize profit. To compete means taking money that you used to put in your pocket and putting it back in research and development, putting it back in investing in human resources. They don't want to do that. That is cutting into their profit margin. So this has always been their biggest problem. It is a inferior, ultimately flawed and unsustainable system, and it should be, we're always talking about free markets, capitalism, competition. This is a system that has demonstrated it is incapable of sustaining itself. Brush it into the dustbin and find a better system. And maybe instead of cursing China, maybe you should try to learn from China. Rasheed, you have anything you want to think about that, say about that, or and then Scott?
I think Scott has something to say.
No, I've been talking nonstop. If you want to throw something in, you can go ahead.
No, I'll pass on this question.
All right, let's go. We only got 2 left, and then we're done. I warned you guys about the question and answer. It gave you your chance out. And the conflict is the conflict with Iran going to happen? In my opinion, conflict with the U.S. and Iran would benefit Russia and China because the U.S. can't manage 3 major fronts, even with NATO support. But that's what we're talking about. The U.S. is trying to find a way to hold Russia and China, freeze the conflicts, or continue pressuring China in the Asia-Pacific region, take out Iran, and then take its resources and redirect it to the next. And this is called defeating in detail. This is a military strategy. This is what generals will do on a battlefield. They have a large enemy. They will try to isolate the different units, defeat one, then the other, instead of fighting them all at the same time. And that is what the United States is trying to do. So no, not necessarily. That might not necessarily be beneficial for Russia and China. And a lot of factors, if you ask, is it going to happen? Is war with Iran going to happen? We have been on the cusp of it for many, many years. And it's because things the U.S. does, things Iran does, pushes the date of conflict further forward or further back.
I would just say that there seems to be this. I talk to a lot of people that are very pro-Iranian, a lot of people from the Middle East. I'm in different group chats and stuff, and there seems to be this. I don't know why people think that Iran is invincible. I don't get this. There's this, Israel can't attack Iran, they'll get wiped off the face of the earth, or the US is not going to do this because they're not going to get engaged in another war in the Middle East, blah 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 blah. We just toppled Syria. So that if you want to talk about their willingness to create chaos in the Middle East to further their position, don't doubt it, because they're going to do it. I don't think war with Iran favors Russia or China at all. I think that peace and stability favor Russia and China the most. Russia is a mineral exporter primarily, energy exporter as well. So peace is better for them because they make more money when they can deliver their goods around the world. China is, basically entirely, a sea-based economy. So they want peace, and especially in their region, that's how their economy stays afloat. The only people that really benefit from wars right now are the U.S., and that's because they've positioned themselves to benefit from conflict. China is not in that position. Russia is slightly in that position in Ukraine, but even then you're looking at it and you're like, Russia doesn't want to be in Ukraine. They don't want to be fighting. It's not, they're losing, I think Mediazona just hit 100,000 confirmed Russian casualties through obituaries and stuff like that. So you have 100,000 men that you've lost. It's not what you want to be doing, but the U.S. will go in. They won't even invade Iran. This is the thing, is that people seem to misunderstand this. The second they get a casus belli to attack Iran, if they want to, if they go through with it, all they're going to do is a shock and awe campaign that ruins the Iranian economy, Iranian infrastructure, and completely degrades their ability to respond militarily anywhere in the Middle East. And they might get some hits off. They might hit Israel. They might hit a U.S. warship or whatever. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know what their capabilities are necessarily to do that. They've never demonstrated it, in an actual war, so you can't know. But say they hit Diego Garcia, say they wipe Diego Garcia, which is a U.S. airbase off the coast of Saudi Arabia in the Indian Ocean. Say they wipe it off the map. What does that do? What does that do to the Americans? If Israel gets hit with a bunch of missiles, what is that going to do? It's going to further their propaganda position. This is the same argument I made with Russia and Ukraine. If Russia starts striking the Ukrainian parliament building and hitting nuclear power plants and actually doing the things that it takes to collapse a country and win a war very quickly, there are going to be massive negative repercussions, and you always have to think about what those negative repercussions are. And for Iran, the best thing Iran can do right now is not fight. If Iran can avoid a war at any cost, because the second they engage in a conflict, I believe the regime will be toppled. I just don't think that they have the capabilities to keep their populace even fed if a serious shock and awe campaign occurs against the Iranian infrastructure and regime. I just don't think that they're going to have the staying power, and I don't think Russia and China are going to hop in to help either. I don't think that that's the position Russia and China are even in right now. So that's my take on that.
My take is a little different. I do believe that. I do believe that that there will be a war in West Asia, and I do believe it will be the United States and Israel against Iran, and I think Iran will give just as good as it takes. I believe that will be the breaking point of the American empire. You got to understand that the United States is desperate. She's very desperate, and again, as I said, she doesn't have the luxury of not going to war with Iran to face China. She has to weaken China and Russia, and Iran sits in that sweet spot right there. Because if she can weaken Iran, if she can topple Iran, then she buys more time for the dollar because she can switch the Iranian oil and gas sales to dollars. Right now, Iran sells her oil and gas outside of dollars. She sells it to China in renminbis. So this in itself would buy the empire a little time, and it would help it to rest, recalibrate, and rearm. It would also serve as an example for those other nations that in West Asia that are bucking up against the U.S. It would say, well, America still is a power to be reckoned with, so we can't antagonize her. Now, not saying that America is going to beat Iran at all. I'm just giving you a scenario. And also, if she can take Iran, she's, again, in the underbelly of Russia, China, India, and Pakistan. This means that she can disrupt trade, the Belt and Road. She can disrupt the Pipelineistan. She can do all of that stuff, which buys her more time and gives her certain control over oil sale, gas sales, everything. It weakens China's Belt and Road. It weakens China's economy, and also it weakens Russia at the same time. So I believe that America doesn't have a choice. She's going to have to go to war with Iran, because if she goes to war with Russia, she loses militarily. If she goes to war with in Europe, she'll lose against Russia in Europe. Globally, that's a different thing. If she goes to war with China in Asia, she'll lose. I'm not saying that if they go the war in the close to America that she will lose. I'm saying that if she goes to war on China's doorstep, she'll lose. So the best way to weaken them and soften them up for the wars that she's plotting to have is to get Iran. And that's where I see it. And these wars are assured because the empire doesn't have much time.
I just don't know if a war is even necessary. I mean, we saw a little bit of a proxy war in Syria, but I would say really the economic pressure, Turkey, the U.S. in Syria, Israel on that far side is what really ended up bringing down the Syrian regime. So I think that if you just put a ton of pressure all around Iran, there could potentially be an opportunity where you don't necessarily have to go to war to overthrow the regime, but that's just a possibility.
So my take on all of this is that I don't know. I honestly don't know, because I see good points both of you have made. And again, who's predicting that Syria was going to collapse? Nobody was. That was a done deal. That was in the bag. Russia was there, Iran was there, and that was that. And then that wasn't that, and Syria was gone. And so this demonstrated, whether people want to admit it or not, Russia and Iran were overextended. And how overextended are they? We just don't know. Now, Iran has survived all of this time. Everything the U.S. has thrown at Iran has managed. I know people who have lived in Iran, and they tell me about the strengths and weaknesses, and some of it is not that flattering. Some people say Israel's tiny, Iran is huge. That's a benefit, but it's also a liability in a lot of ways, because the U.S. not only could, it regularly does stir up these different groups, the Baluchistan in southwest Pakistan, and then in southeastern Iran, they always have problems, terrorists, and the U.S. is surrounding them and has been surrounding them and pressuring them. They have this missile capability, and they demonstrated it a little bit with that exchange with Israel, that Israel and the U.S. provoked, by the way. But those missiles aren't infinite. How many do they have, and how long can they sustain that versus the air defense capabilities of the U.S. and Israel, which we know are depleted because of Ukraine? So there are so many factors here to add up. You just don't know. It's just like people predicting who would win if Russia went into Ukraine. Like, you just look back at some of those predictions, how comical some of them were. You just don't know until it starts happening, and you see who's able to, not just who's better prepared, but who's better able to adapt. And so I just don't know. I wouldn't say one way or the other. I think you guys both made really good points. And we have one last.
I just wanted to say that I think part of the key to all of this is how the Russians go forward. I see them being, and I'm more confident now in my position than I was 2 months ago. Me and Brian have been in DMs or in private chats or whatever, talking about this for months, about how we were concerned about a Minsk III, how we were concerned that the Russians were going to play into this new improved Trump, spiel narrative thing that was going on. It appears that has been negated quite severely. You can see it in the way that Rubio specifically today coming out and getting upset about how there's no progress, and which is hilarious, because when you listen to Zelensky talk, Zelensky's still talking about NATO membership, still talking about not giving up any territory in Ukraine, well, all that. So it's funny to hear them talk about how the Russians aren't wanting peace when it's obviously the Ukrainians and the Europeans who are openly saying that that's not going to happen. But it was really Russia, I thought, was the key to this. If Russia played soft to the West and, went for a ceasefire or reestablished strong relations and kind of pulled away from China, that the U.S. position may have been able to be salvaged in terms of moving to Iran and moving to China, getting Russia on side, at least temporarily and minorly, not fully on side, but just slightly pull them away from China. That seems to be failing. I don't know. And I think that makes the transition, collapsing the Iranian regime much more difficult, because China, if Iran collapses, China is going to just immediately pivot to Russia for its energy requirements. And this was part of the reason why we wanted to pull Russia away from China. Now, Russia's not going to be able to completely cover China's energy requirements, but it will at least give some stability underneath if Iran is to collapse. So I think that that was really key. And I think that it makes the equation or the situation much more difficult for the U.S. going forward.
And then that connects to this question. Do you agree that the U.S. regime is currently positioning the EU as the next proxy in their ongoing conflict with Russia? Absolutely. We just went over this. Pete literally spelled it out.
I just don't know if they're going to be able to get the people to do it. This is the thing, is like, there's a certain mentality in Ukraine that I don't know exists really anywhere else in Europe. You might be able to get the Poles to do something of that sort. The Baltics is not big enough. So I don't know what proxy you're going to fight. And at least at the time being, I was really concerned that the ceasefire was just going to be a means to get European troops into Ukraine, and then that's a tripwire force that Russia would have to breach the ceasefire. So that would be like a double stop measure to keep the Russians from re-engaging in this conflict, and buying Ukraine time, so on and so forth. And this seems to be really the crux of what the Russians are preventing. And that's vitally important, because if those peacekeepers do get in, I don't think that the conflict will resume, because the risk is just far too great at that point. I think the Russians understand this. Barring a ceasefire, I don't know if you're going to be able to get European troops into Ukraine. I just don't know how that plays domestically in Europe right now. And as the economic situation continues to worsen, especially in Europe, getting France or Britain or Poland on board to send troops into Ukraine just seems like a Looney Tunes story right now.
It does. Rasheed?
I think they already have some European troops in there. They already have some there, and I think they're positioning so that if a ceasefire takes place, they can rapidly deploy others there and position themselves to have a buffer zone to try to stop Russia from securing its own borders. In words, because I believe that the United States really doesn't want this conflict to end. They just want it to simmer for a little bit so that they can double back around after they take care of Iran, China, and then come back to Russia. And but time, again, we go back to something. Time is not the luxury that the empire used to have. Money is not a luxury that the empire used to have. So plans that they had that they didn't want to put in play, they must put in play, because the time and the economics is against this. So I'll say that, and I'll leave it there.
All right, and we are at the 2-hour mark, which I think is a great time to end this. It's like 10 p.m. here in Thailand, and you guys both have the day ahead of you. Thank you so much for joining me, and also Angelo, who had to leave us early. Thank you, everybody who joined us live, and everyone who is watching this afterwards. Again, please check the video description below to find and follow Rasheed, the Red Pill Diaries, Angelo Giuliano, also Scott of Kalibrated. I will add his information as soon as I am done here, and also my channel and all the different ways you can help support alternative media. Again, thank you all, and until next time, bye for now.